Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well? Great. I'm going to try not to be nervous, except from the fact that I'm on a mic. It's great to be here. My name is Agustin del Vento. I'm the founder of Change Champions Consulting. It's a pleasure to be at BC Aware as a sponsor. This is something that I actually had never dreamed of doing, and I'm really proud that we're doing this. We are a bunch of communication specialists, trainers, psychologists, marketing specialists, so we have not a lot of knowledge of cybersecurity, but we do know a lot about people. So we're going to be talking about people, and I hope that I can leave you with a good message today. Our presentation is called Building a Culture of Cybersecurity Awareness, and we're going to attempt to give you some ideas of how to do that. So really briefly about us, our mission is really to partner with IT organizations to help them realize their IT investments. We see that organizations purchase a lot of licenses and things, and then users don't really know how to use them or don't buy into them and reject them. So our job is really to help people buy in and get on board with the change that IT is proposing. We, in the space of security, we work in other spaces like Office 365. In this space, we want to turn people into our strongest security asset. As you all know, people are our weakest link. So if we have people that know what they're doing, we're in a better place. And as I said, we're not necessarily experts in the technologies, but we understand them because we work with many clients that are doing the same things over and over. And so we have a good mix of understanding of the technology from a user perspective and then understanding how to move people along with the journey. Today's objectives, what I'm going to be doing is talking to you a little bit about what makes a good cybersecurity program, some best practices, some things that we've done in organizations that have really worked. And I think the proof is that we have 3 amazing clients here today that are going to be part of a panel at the end of the presentation talking about what their experience has been like. So I'm really, again, proud of that. And finally, we hope to engage in a bit of a conversation with you about what worked for you and maybe have some questions from the audience. For our agenda, we're going to break it up into 4 steps. We're going to talk to you about awareness drivers. So why would you want to invest in cybersecurity to begin with, cybersecurity awareness? We're going to talk to you about 2 approaches that we've seen a lot in clients over and over again, a traditional approach and a more unconventional approach, and a little bit of the science behind our programs, and then 5 steps, tactical advice to start your own program. And then, as I said, we're going to finish with our panel of speakers, and I'll introduce him in a second. We're really excited about this part because I think it's going to give you the view from the top that we don't often get a chance to see, even myself. So good stuff. And we have an app called Slido. So if you look up your phones, slido.com, you can ask questions there. So we're going to have 5 minutes for questions at the end. We're going to try to attempt to answer as many as we can. So if you submit your questions through Slido, when you type slido.com, you'll find that it's asking you to put a code. The code is awareness, and you'll be in the Slido place to do the submission of your questions. Without further ado, I want to introduce our panel. 3 leaders of some of the, I would say, Canada's largest and most prestigious organizations. Incredibly proud to be working with them. Stuart is the VP of Enterprise Architecture at Quadrail. Suzie, amazing leader and woman. She's been leading the charge at Finning, and Kelly doing the same thing in Interfor. So thank you so much for coming. Obviously, their time is super valuable, so we're very proud of having them here. I want to start the session with a quick poll and ask you, if you were here last year, you know that Mitnick was our keynote speaker for the event, and he said something that stood with me and one of my colleagues from Finning, and he actually recommended that I put this quote here. He made a claim to fame, in essence, that he has been able to successfully penetrate any systems in any of the companies he's doing this with. And I just want to ask for you to maybe take a guess as to what he stated there. And there's no secret to this. This is in his website as well, so don't cheat and go to the website. But I'll give you just 1 minute to go to slido.com. Awareness is your code, and submit your answer to this question. So, what is Mitnick's claim to fame success rate when trying to penetrate a system in any of the organizations you've been with? 1 minute. Let's see that. All right. This is tricking me a little bit. It's supposed to be more of a. Oh, it's not even showing. There you go. All right. So the majority of us have said 100%, which is actually exactly right. It's tough to see there, but that's what most people, I think, won 98%. The right answer is actually 100%. So he claims that he's maintained 100% success rate penetrating systems when, and I think this is the part that I like about this quote, is when both a technical exploit and social engineering are involved. And I think that, if you think about social engineering, the moment you add people to the equation, this is your wild card, basically, right? Something that we can't control. So you cannot social engineer a system, but you can definitely do it with people. And he was explaining in the keynote, he was explaining the different ways in which he'd do that, and it was just incredible to hear, the different ways in which he would get into organizations even without a card to get in, or so many different ways. So why I bring this up, and is for obvious reasons, right? We're talking about people here, and why should you invest in a security awareness program? Well, we know for a fact that 90% of breaches have to do with people. So there's some form of human error. So if you think about how much money IT invests in technology and how little they invest in people, there's something that to be said about that. The other thing that we know is that prevention is cheaper than the cure, right? And over the last few years, the numbers are increasing, but the cost of a security breach, according to the Ponemon Institute, has been, I think this is a 2018 stat, it's almost $4 million let alone what happens to your reputation and all those things, right? So again, the cure is probably more expensive than prevention, and that's why you would want to have a security awareness program. And then finally, we hear from a lot of clients that want to do risk reduction, so they just know that they have to do these things because they are, for policies or for SOX, or so that's another big reason that we hear a lot, is simply reducing risk and being compliant. All right, so I was saying I want to talk to you about two approaches, and we are on this side, on the unconventional side, but we've seen a lot of organizations take a traditional approach. So I thought I would share this because it kind of reflects a philosophy, and it reflects what we see a lot of IT teams' philosophy being. One of the things that we hear a lot is the intimidating sort of factor. Say, if people click on the wrong link, I'll take away their access to their credentials until they show me that they can be safe, right? So that's that intimidating approach. And it sort of relies on this idea that if I tell you what you shouldn't do, you're going to learn not to do it again, which is, it's a way of thinking about it. And maybe you could say it works. The other one is that this is an IT thing. And so IT organizations will say, well, our IT security team needs to do a security awareness campaign, and it's treated as really as a thing that IT security is doing to the business. And so it ends up being a security task, right? And finally, the traditional approach says that if I send an email or if I post a result of a phishing campaign in perhaps in the refrigerator in the kitchen, somebody's going to see it, and that's going to do the change that I was hoping that people would say, well, we sent the message, we told people that we're going to do the phishing campaign, why are they still clicking, right? So the assumption is that I do one thing and that's going to change people's behaviors. So that's your traditional approach, and if you're working in IT, you've probably seen this, I'm guessing, yes. The more unconventional approach that we like to take is to challenge a little bit of this and say, if you want cybersecurity to be interesting to people, why don't we talk to them about what they care about, right? So let's talk to them about their families and how they can be safe. Let's show them what other people have been doing that have been positive things to make the organization more secure. So let's share best practices and lessons learned and tell them what the solution is instead of telling them what not to do, because magically you don't know the solution if somebody telling you what not to do, right? So instead we tried to show them the solutions and reinforce the positive behaviors. The other thing we try to do with this unconventional approach is we try to make cybersecurity an issue of the business and not just IT. So I encourage you to do the same and to look for partnerships in your business so that everyone is part of the solution, and in reality, everyone is. If you think about the role of finance or risk or legal, HR, communications, those are all departments that you can leverage. And then finally, our campaigns are usually an ongoing effort, and that is so that people don't see it as the flavor of the day. Oh, IT is doing this event on Cybersecurity Awareness Month. That's usually, it's better than nothing, of course, but it's not as effective as reminding people over and over that this is something that they need to be careful about. And it could be as simple as giving them a tip that they can use for meetings where they can start a meeting with a safety share or a security share, right? So it doesn't have to be a lot of effort, but at least is constant, and people see it as a comprehensive program. So those are the two approaches. And then just to elaborate a little bit on this and why this is the science behind it. So why do we say that things are not necessarily, an email is not enough or a training event is not enough? There's plenty of research that looks at how people change and how they move from current state to future state. And the research indicates, even in things like, for example, when researchers look at how people quit smoking or drugs or alcoholism, that people need to go through a series of phases until the behavior is actually rooted and becomes the new behavior. And so ProSci is an organization that does a lot of research in change management, and they say that organizations and people in organizations go through a phase they call the awareness phase, where they understand what the problem is, and then they move to the desire phase, where they actually not only understand, but they're interested in hearing more. And then they move to the knowledge, which now not only I'm interested, I understand what's in it for me, but I also want to know more about this. And then the ability. And the ability and the knowledge are a little bit different, that I may know what the policies are, I may know the things that I need to do, but I haven't practiced. So an example being is, you may tell someone that you're going to be doing a phishing campaign, and they may still click the link, right? So really, you have to go through these phases and try to reinforce every one of these moments. So try to look for opportunities to help people practice and maybe make a mistake and then correct the behavior and so on. And then finally, if you don't have reinforcement, what's going to happen is people will revert back to the old ways. And that's, again, why we continue to reinforce the message and try to get it to stick. So that's what reinforcement does. So in essence, we treat cybersecurity awareness as a change process, as any change. The other thing that we do, and this is again based on research, is we present content over and over. So say every quarter or every month or every 2 months, whatever the frequency is. And that's because we know by research that people are more likely to remember things if you leave some space in between and then release a little bit of information again. So the learning curve, the memory curve, will always be a little higher if you present the information over and over again. going back to the positivity, all our programs are really looking at what people are doing right? And this is based on research in psychology and change management that talks about, it's called appreciative inquiry. And the idea is that in order to change an organization, you have to be able to understand what works. And so the researchers that do this kind of methodology, they will interview people and ask them, what are the things that you're doing that are making you so great at what you do? And then they tried to augment that. So instead of trying to reduce what's not working, they try to amplify what works. And so I'll show you an example in a minute of how we do that in one of our programs. So in essence, we don't necessarily look at the problem so much. We want to know the problem, but we actually put more emphasis on how things should be working. And then finally, we know that perhaps the stick approach, take away the laptop or take away the license, will help, but it may be short term. So what we try to do is invite people to be part of the story, be part of the solution, and that keeps them going. And actually, it's interesting because we have a lot of good feedback from leadership in organizations because now they feel like the organization is all contributing to the solution. So I'll quickly run you through 5 steps and show you a video of one of our clients, and then we'll jump into the panel discussion. So if you want to start your own program, one of the first things you want to do is you're going to want to identify what your security roadmap needs to look like. What are your goals? So are you implementing MFA? Do you need to get better at your password? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then work with your teams to design a roadmap for adoption and awareness. We also want to look at what the weaknesses are. So maybe there's feedback from a penetration test, or there's information that the security operations team can give you that could be useful to identify the risk. And then you want to have a vision and a mission for the program. We actually develop a brand for the program sometimes as well. And then we build a roadmap that goes along with it. So what you see here is some of the tactics we'll use. So we'll map every one of these months to a topic, and then we'll use different tactics to communicate those topics and reinforce them. And the topics are not just passwords, but there may be how to be more secure with your device, right? And so we try to tackle it from more the use case and not so much from just the one thing that people need to do better. The other thing that we do is we engage more than just IT, and we try to look for examples from the business. And in doing this, what we try to do is gain ambassadors. We'll identify people that are naturally interested in the topic and try to bring them along in the journey as well. So we'll also bring some strategic partners such as communications, HR, legal. We'll work with them to convey their message, and they'll be wanting to help us with our mandate as well. So this is an example from Interfor. Thank you, Kelly, for allowing us to use this example. It's basically, we interviewed the VP of Marketing and Sales in Interfor, and she was a victim of a spear phishing attack. So we'll see what she has to say about what happened to her. And we use this, obviously, to promote how to be careful with email.
I was on vacation in late May in St. Louis when I received an email from one of my customers that I've known for probably over 20 years. And the email was asking me, hey Don, I just got this email from one of your sales rep in Peachtree City, Bob Kirkland, asking me to make a change on where we're sending our payments to Interfor. I immediately sent an email back to our customer and asked him not to make any changes, that I would verify this in Vancouver, but to please make no changes. It was not a normal request that we receive from customers asking a customer to change where they send their payments. So it was very unusual, and that made me suspicious immediately. He said, look at the email I just got below. And the email below it looked as if it came from me, but it said, I just verified, please go ahead and make your routing changes and your bank changes. Well, I immediately at that point called the customer, said no, that did not come from me, put everything on hold, don't make any changes until I get back with you. When we were emailing our customer back, the response was being changed. So it made it look as if we were agreeing to them making the change in their payable systems. What I learned from this experience was that, to always be careful, always be thinking when you see click a link that is an email that you're not familiar with, or a link or a company that you're not familiar with, always double check. We did find out a little later, I didn't notice it immediately, that there was just like one letter off on Interfor.com.
So kudos to Donna for contacting the service desk immediately, for not clicking on the link, and for attempting to contact the customer through alternate means, a phone call, to verify the request. 3 perfect actions that prevented this attack. So if you detect something that you think is a phishing attempt in your email, it's important that you don't simply delete it. I love that, that's good. We also want to know about it, we being IT. So please report that phishing attempt to IT. Either just forward the email simply to the IT service desk, or pick up the phone and call the IT service desk. Either way, we'll be notified.
So I think a great example of how simple it could be to deliver a message, and how powerful that somebody that you know, or maybe that's representative of your business unit, will say it instead of necessarily IT saying it, right? So if you really want to get through the clutter of messages and information that probably you have in your organization and see, make it visible, these are great ways of doing it. All right, Sorry, move on. So the other thing is think outside the box. So we tend to think of email as the only way in which we reach people. There's many different ways in which you can do it. So you can invite people to a swag event. You can do a pop quiz. You can do cool posters that will get people's attention. Here's one of my favorite ones for Interfor, where we develop a brand that really resembles their own, obviously, industry. So just make sure that you get visibility for the work that you're doing, and that will go a long way. And I would say it's much better to add a little bit of the colors of the company and not just download something from the web and print it and put it in the hallway, because that's really not going to do much for you. All right. So the other thing is, and you most probably know, phishing campaigns are a good, effective way of creating awareness and behavioral change. It's probably not the only one, again, because of that change curve. The phishing exercise will tackle that ability, but not necessarily everything else, right? So if you're doing a phishing campaign, we suggest that you communicate. So we get a lot of questions from clients is, do we communicate that we're going to do a phishing campaign, or we do it blind so that they kind of fall for the fish and we see what's the baseline? Well, our opinion, and again, going back to this positive philosophy, is that you want to take every opportunity to communicate to your users what is the right way of being. So if you are, in our opinion, if you communicate, is a good thing, because then you're giving them an opportunity to learn right from the start. There's no reason to be treating people like students where you're trying to see how many, fall for the fish. It's, in our opinion, it's not necessary to do that, but it's up to everyone. The other thing is you may want to do this frequently. Again, we recommend quarterly to do it at least, and see how the trend keeps going. And you don't have to communicate every time, but at least make sure that you communicate up front, especially with leadership. They don't like surprises. With the approach, again, we try to communicate the results as we go along, because we feel like if people see the trend going better, then they'll be more interested in helping as well. So this has been a game changer, I would say, for some of our clients, in which people are learning really not to click. So try to make the tone non-threatening, engage them in the solution again, and they'll be part of the solution with you. And then last step is, there's obviously no gain if you can't measure these things. And it was interesting yesterday in the CXO event, when the question about measurement came up, there was a little bit of silence in the room, because I think everyone thought, how we're going to measure, how do we measure what we're doing, right? And it's not easy, especially if you don't have the systems in place to do that. We think of our work, we need to at least look at 2 different ways of assessing our effectiveness. One is behavioral change. Obviously, we want to see that people are doing better. The way we do that is obviously phishing campaigns and the click rates going down. We expect to see more suspicious events reported to the help desk, for instance. You may be looking at successful breaches. You may be looking at the amount of computers that get unlocked and people when they're not being attended. So there's many different ways you can sort of operationalize these measures and try to measure every 3 months, 6 months, do a touch point and make sure that things are going better. So that's our best attempt to do the measurement. And then we always look at the engagement. So it's not all about how much people are changing, but it's also what are they saying, how much are they engaging with our content. So we look at click rates, or we do pop surveys, and we also hear, ask what people are saying. Are they talking to the CIO and saying this campaign works? So that informal feedback, don't underestimate that, because it's really powerful as well, especially as your leaders in each of your organizations. So those are recommendations for measurement. So these are 5 steps that we think will help you. In closing, remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's not just an email. Make your approach meaningful and positive, and try to measure your change as you go. And as you go, you'll learn what works and what doesn't work, and you'll probably change some things and get the program better and better. So we have now our panel. Just to refresh your memories, we have Stuart from Quadrille, Suzie from Finning, and Kelly from Interfor. I'm going to ask them to, if you don't mind, sitting in front here. Thanks for coming. So you can submit your questions through slido.com, and awareness is your code. And I have 4 questions for them, but 2, if you don't see, if we can't see Slido for any reason, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask. I have asked all of them to decide if they want to answer the question or not, because there may be some things that they can't disclose. So the first question that I'd like to ask is, what advice would you give somebody looking to implement a security program now that you've done yours? So would like to start maybe.
Stuart? I'll pick that one up. In our particular case, the company I work with has only been around for 2.5 years now. So we really started from the ground up. We went from 0 employees to 1,500 employees in just on 2 years. Started with $0 to assets under management of $28 billion. So it was pretty fast, meteoric growth, and we really had to contextualize our program in the eyes of the executive, who had all of these things that they had to keep their eye on in terms of growing the organization. And essentially what we did was keep it as simple as possible. Keep the messaging simple, really pivot the messaging around value, as well as something that's meaningful to the organization, such as management of risk. Our organization manages the real estate assets on behalf of the British Columbia Investment Corporation. So a risk-based approach is incredibly important to the executive. So it's really about contextualizing and starting with the end in mind, saying what exactly do we want to achieve after we've invested X amount of dollars in a program, how do we want to move the dial, and then start pivoting the program around that, identifying specific projects that are going to achieve that goal. So really the message was keep it simple, keep it deliberate, and be very, very considered about how you go about tackling the program.
Yeah. I'm just gonna yell. What worked for us was making it personal to your workforce. If you use a program and you say secure the company, secure Finning, secure the corporate assets, and it means nothing to your employees and workforce, it's just going to be a compliance exercise and they're not going to participate. Whereas if you make it fun, engaging, and about them, then you're going to get more traction, more ambassador, more people wanting to listen to your content and use it. If you think of it, parents in the room, if your cybersecurity department is giving you tools and tricks to ensure that your teenage daughter is not putting content on the internet she's going to really regret 10 years later, it's a win. It means something for you, and you can use that in your awareness campaign, because a good practice at home will translate into good behavior at work. So everybody wins in this case, at home and at work.
Thanks. Should I stay on the same question?
Yep, if you want to answer or if you want to add anything.
I guess what I would add is to say that it's important when you're starting out to define why. Have a good shared understanding of why we're establishing this security program, because it's not going to be easy. It's going to require capital investment, prioritization above other projects, behavioral change. So there will be times along the journey it gets very difficult, and at those times you want to make sure you all have a common understanding, the business, IT, security, of why you're doing this in the first place. Because advancement in security isn't really perceived by a lot of people in your business groups as adding a whole lot of value, unless you understand that we're here and we need to be here for some important underlying reasons. So just define the why and make sure everybody buys into it.
If you don't mind if I add to that, what did you do, Kelly, to get that why to be understood?
We learned some painful lessons, and we knew we weren't where we needed to be in terms of our controls and our security measures. So we commissioned an independent audit to call that out, to air our dirty laundry more or less, and then we shared those results with the executive, with the audit committee. We had to really get a common understanding of where we were and what it meant in terms of our exposure to business operational risk. And so that was our why. We can't operate like this. We're too big and we're too, the security of our information assets and our business operations can't be exposed in the way that they were.
Interesting. Thank you. Suzie, I know you had some good experiences at Finning with selling the security program to executives. Can you share a little bit about what you did to get the buy-in from the
It was
top?
very naggy. Worse than with my husband. Really, it was show them the benefits to what it was going to do. It's a simple ROI. In many cases, when you start your cybersecurity program, you might invest $0 or time and effort from your team as opposed to procuring a $100,000 widget or security technology. The ROI is massive for little investment, and it was articulating those financial benefits that was going to translate into risk reduction for the organization by just investing time and some mind share and having them sponsored. So we had videos with our executive, we had them buy in, we had them say to people that were angry about phishing the why and why they supported it. And as they saw results and trend going down in terms of our click rate and they saw good behavior in practice, they wanted more and more. It was one of our biggest return on investment, which was quite minimal at its inception. That's how we got the mind share, really, is to make that financial conversation with our executive of, we pay little, but we're going to get massive return.
Excellent, thank you. Going to move to the next question. We're going to leave a couple of minutes for questions. Can you comment on any tactics that worked best for the organization? So, of the things that we've done, anything that you saw, leadership perhaps, give you compliments for, or that was just a good game changer for awareness?
Well, in our case, I think the fact that we approached it from the perspective of how are we going to Suzie's point, get the best bang for the buck, both financially and from a risk return perspective. The whole world of cybersecurity is very intimidating to, especially to executives. There's, if you speak to any of the vendors out there, they will, tell you that the sky is falling, and where do you start? And it becomes a very, very difficult conversation, or at least a difficult starting point for an executive to decide where do I spend my money, and what is important, and is the world really falling apart? So what worked really well for us was contextualizing that for the executives and making it something that they could really relate to, and we kind of mapped our program, from the get-go, against two axes. We broke down the program and the complexity into small, manageable projects, and we had business value and risk management on the one axis and cost on the other axis, and that just breaks it up into 4 quadrants, and we essentially tackled it and created the roadmap around saying, okay, we'll tackle the highest return with the lowest effort first, so that we get those big bangs, and then we celebrated those wins by communicating them to the rest of the organization. So we started that way, and the most important thing that we really did in the way that we approached it was kept it, as I said, really, really simple, and kept away from the language of compliance and fear. and really kept it in the language of this is what you're going to get out of it, and actually mapped it out over a 2-year time frame, but only really presented it in small 3-month increments, so that you're not trying to sell an entire program to an executive in one go and say, by the way, you're going to be spending $3 million on this, or whatever the case may be. It's just invest a little bit of money. Over 3 months, we'll demonstrate how we can deliver value from those, and then we can make another decision around continuing to invest. And that's kind of how we put it together. One of the things that I did really early on was once I'd mapped that roadmap out, I got a really strong team to support me in terms of program and project management to actually deliver and execute.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other additions to tactics that work for your organization?
We had, we used a little branding trick, I'll call it, that we borrowed from Suzie, and that was to use the word safety in our program name. So for us in forestry, safety is religion. So that word just has such gravity in our culture that by calling our program, our awareness program, the Digital Safety Awareness Campaign, we've automatically got eyes and ears because we use the word safety before we've even tried to deliver a message. So, you know, that brand might be different in every organization, but for us, the use of the word safety automatically gets us attention. So that was a little trick we borrowed from. I think you guys did that, right? Safety?
Yep.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Good ideas. Any challenges you faced that you had to overcome, and how you overcome them? Any difficult conversations or?
I'll start off. So important to know, I think, why you're doing it and where you are and where you want to get to. For us, the hardest thing that we've done so far is that determination of where do we want to get to. It's easy to charge after a bunch of activities saying, hey, we're just too immature, we're not protected, we're at risk, and so on and so forth. But it makes a lot more sense if you can determine a state where you can say that's where we're trying to get to, and give people a picture of that vision so they can help get there and they know when they've gotten there. For us, we were trying to link our end state maturity of information security with a corporate risk tolerance. Of course, that didn't exist, so we had to try and figure out what that corporate risk tolerance was, and that doesn't sit in IT. That's a high level of like executive conversation and sitting down in a room, running through unpleasant scenarios and what would we do if this happened or if that happened, what could we tolerate. That proved to be very hard to coordinate and very hard to get participation in, but ultimately we did. But that was a hard thing so far for us.
Interesting. Suzie?
Challenge for us was to, in a global organization with 4 different communications teams, 4 very protective of the communications of the end users communications team, our biggest challenge was to get them on board. These groups had the primacy in sending information to our end user and employees globally. They really didn't want any teams or anybody else than them sending any material out, and it was winning over that communications group that required such an insane amount of effort, intense, and we're in one region at the time, to help us move that agenda forward and show that we were going to be mindful of the brand guideline, we were going to be mindful of the content, we were not going to spam everybody every week with emails. It took an inordinate amount of time, but once you get past that hurdle, that you can use them to your advantage and have them send a communication on your behalf, which then reduces the workload on your own team, and you have your internal comms team doing some of the work for your campaign. It takes a while, it's a journey if you have any communications group like we have at Finning, but it's worth it to get less cycle on your internal team to do that communication and outreach out to your employees and the workforce you want to educate.
Thank you. Do you want to?
Sure, and I would echo what Kelly was saying. It's, you know, I'd say a similar challenge that we had in terms of creating that end state vision and being able to map towards that. I think in fairness, though, you know, we did have a lot of executive visibility relative to the security program, and it was in fact one of the top 4 priorities for the board of directors. So there was no real sales job required in that sense. But in terms of contextualizing, so how do you tackle what and in what order, and making it make sense for them to consume, that was part of the challenge, and we had a lot of support from the Chief Operating Officer in achieving that. So that, I think we probably didn't have as many challenges as a lot of organizations do in that sense. The one area that I did find pretty interesting was that the IT organization at that time, in fact, didn't, I think, appreciate what the nature of the problem was. From the perspective of a lot of people in IT, it was a case of just enabling some capabilities within Office 365 or some kind of tool, and your environment is safe. The approach at that point in time was, you take a laptop or a Surface and you just basically make it unusable, and as a consequence, nobody can get in, including the user, and so we're safe. So it was really getting the IT organization really to pivot around that, and the way I was able to do that was by elevating the program away from IT, in fact, and making an initiative that was driven by the management board, who supported it and gave that executive level support, and actually spun off the cybersecurity program as a separate entity from the actual IT organization. It wasn't run as an IT program at all.
Thank you. Last question, and then feel free to think of a question to ask our panel. What are the benefits that you've seen, indirect benefits perhaps, from having engaged in a cybersecurity awareness program?
We have less incident, and we have a workforce that know we exist, and it's no longer the bad cop. Oh, cybersecurity is coming my way, I must have done something wrong. They want to hear from us, they want to see us, and they're not as afraid to bring back something that looks unusual. It might not be an incident, but we've had early alerting systems in place with our workforce because they're no longer afraid of reaching out to us. It's not going to be judgmental. They know they can email itsecurity@finning.com or come to our floor. They'll get an answer, and they're not going to be slap on the wrist for having done something bad, or if they make a mistake, they come up and they fess up to it, as opposed to us having to deal with the results of the mistakes, which most incidents are a result of human mistakes. They're not willingly wanting to create bad for the organization. It's early detection system for free. That's the value we got.
I was thinking when I worked with you, I think one of the things that I found in common was that my impression was that IT was also it was kind of this idea that IT was doing something to change the business, and it was kind of an effort, change management effort from the IT side that wasn't necessarily always there. Did you see this? Did you experience this, or is this just my imagination? No, in general, I think any of you. Have you seen any leaders in the organization speak to IT now doing? I guess what I'm trying to say is that I see sometimes IT shines with these kinds of programs because now IT is really doing something to enable users.
I would say it definitely opens up either the first or another channel of communication with the business groups, and using a group who is more specialized in talking to broad audiences like the rest of your company than maybe your average IT person is. It just makes you look a little better than the other way. Mm-hmm. We're not sometimes the greatest at communications or collateral or all that stuff, so we know the content we want to get across, we just don't necessarily know how to do it. So yeah. I think it helps certainly with our communications with our business units.
So I would say, in our case, the benefits are very similar to what Suzie articulated. One of the other benefits we also have harvested from it is the program was really well managed. And as a consequence of kind of laying out that roadmap and really defining what the value outcomes were and hitting that every single time with a high level of discipline. And again, that really talks to the quality of program and project management we had on the program. And that only was made possible by the executive support through funding. But by delivering, we really significantly moved the dial in terms of the level of trust the organization had in our ability to back up what we were saying. We kept it simple, and at the end of the day, I think if you ask anybody in the executive, in the management board today, they would say that they have a very high level of trust, specifically in the cybersecurity function, not because we just spoke about it, but through the really visible change management approach and the training and awareness, but also through the execution of the various phases of the program, and constant communication about where we're at and how well are we doing. And we had, in particular, one area of the program was in fact disaster recovery. It was a very, very high pressure, high visibility program, or project rather, within the program that needed to be delivered, and it was done successfully. And again, that really has embedded the level of trust that the organization now has within the cybersecurity function.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We have time for one question from the audience and wrapping up. Anyone?
So I have a question. How do you decide, well, if you're talking phishing, simulated phishing emails, right? Phishing email can be very simple, something that any of us here is going to scream phishing, to phishing emails that are quite challenging even for us to recognize as phishing. So for your simulated phishing campaigns, how do you decide? Are you stick with one level of difficulty for phishing emails, or do you vary the difficulty of phishing emails to kind of gauge the susceptibility to different types of phishing emails?
So we made a mistake on that one, not intentionally, but we did a blind phishing campaign to help establish that baseline of where we were in terms of awareness, and we had a certain click-through rate, seemed high. And then months later, after we executed a big part of our digital safety awareness campaign, we did it again, except this one was announced a couple of weeks in advance, and the success rate was much higher, which was very disappointing. So I think the problem is we didn't strike the balance of keeping the level of deviousness, if I can find a word, the same. So the second one was far too clever, and the first one wasn't clever enough. And so we weren't able to really measure, did we improve the people's level of awareness, or did we not? So it's not a direct answer to your question, but there's a mistake that we made. We didn't make sure that they were kind of at the same level of deviousness.
Yeah, I'm thinking of actually doing both, the same difficulty as the baseline,
Yeah.
and an easy one to just figure out, how many people are going to fall for the easy one.
You can get a click-through rate, any rate you want, right? You can make it 0 if it's blatantly obvious, or 10%. You can make it 100% if you want. It's pretty arbitrary. You really have to consider the outcome and what you're going to do with the information afterwards.
Any additional comments?
Quickly, we've been at this for 3 years, so we started the first year with the same level of difficulties, and then we tweaked it and increased it, and we get some metrics now with which department is worst offender, repeat offender, and we target different groups so that we can start from the bottom again if they didn't get the first year easy and they keep constantly failing after we increase the difficulties. Reverting back to easier fish so that they can spot them easier, and we do training videos as soon as they click the link to target it to these groups of employees that may not necessarily get the message. And we're trying to do in-person training for different communication tailored to that department, workforce and their style, so that we can increase our chance through the program. So it drives not just the phishing campaign, but we might have in the future different posters or different videos targeted to these groups of individuals to help them understand the phishing.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your attention, and panel.